The only truth that's useful is that everyone gets killed by whoever kills them and by no one else. Hey everyone, welcome back to a novel review, the book podcast, where every week I review a different book. This week, no different. We're kicking off November for the Book World Tour with this wonderful book, The Assault by Harry Mulisch. If this is your first time joining me and you're thinking, what is the Book World Tour? Every month for 2025, I have been traveling through books, not actually traveling through books to a different country just to sort of broaden the reading horizons. The rules have been very simple: 2 books a month, a male and female author where possible, because often I've found translations or translated works have been tricky to find female authors at times. The authors have to be born in that respective country and writing about that respective country, so we get a bit of an insight into what life was or is like in that respective country. So we are off to the Netherlands. We are in November. Only 1 month to go after this. It's been an absolutely incredible and very, very enjoyable experience so far. And I just want to say off the top of my head to start, I think coming into November and obviously December, I think people start to naturally kind of wind up for the year. And in my head, I'd started thinking about sort of the last episode I'm going to do, which is going to be a review of the Book World Tour, what I thought, what countries I loved, what books I loved. And in my mind, I've kind of got the top books that I've absolutely loved this year and what countries they're from. And because of that, I'd kind of, I guess, fallen into this, maybe it's a natural routine of starting to wrap things up. And so when I sort of came into November, I'm like, it's getting colder, things are getting wrapped up. It's just kind of going to be going through the motions for the last few weeks of the year. And, nothing's going to absolutely blow me away. And I was absolutely wrong. This book was incredible and will definitely feature, bit of a spoiler, will definitely feature in my top favorite books for the year. This book really blew me out of the water for how good it is. I do have to say I am probably a little biased because it takes place in the Netherlands, it takes place in Amsterdam. It is a book about it takes place in 1945 and it's in Nazi-occupied Amsterdam, and my grandmother, who still lives in Australia, was alive in Amsterdam. She was born in Amsterdam and lived under Nazi regime in 1945 until they were liberated by the Canadians. So I think there is kind of that emotional element that does make it a bit more intense for me reading. But nonetheless, I still think it was an incredible, incredible book. And I want to start, I guess, by saying that I very nearly didn't not even read this book, didn't even buy this book. I was in the Netherlands a few weeks ago. I was in Amsterdam a few weeks ago, and I'd picked out a few different bookshops to go to, and I picked out books to read for the Book World Tour. I saw this bookshop on the first day that I kind of like saw and was like, oh, that's a bookshop. I'm obviously interested in that, but didn't have the chance to go into it. And then it was only on the last day, as me and my girlfriend were heading back to the station to catch the train home, that we had a bit of time and we were passing the bookshop, and I was like, let's, go in. My girlfriend was a bit like, another bookshop, and I was like, yeah, let's just go in. So I sent her in first and I watched the bags, and then she came out, a couple of minutes later and was like, oh, there's this book you might like. I took a picture of it. You go in and have a look. And so I walk in and I sort of peruse the shelves for a few different things, and then this is the book that she'd picked out, and I looked at it and I read it and I was like, yep, this is it. This sounds incredible. Obviously there's that emotional intensity straight away that I can detect. It looks not too long, which isn't a good thing, isn't a bad thing, but it is something I'm conscious of. Sometimes I don't want to get stuck into too big a book, especially when I'm reading a book a week. And so I picked it up and I read it and I loved it. And you might be thinking, why am I starting with this particular story about buying the book? And I think it's just so interesting to be aware of these little moments that have then had a ripple effect upon your life, because interestingly, that's what this book was about. Sort of a very small but very large thing that took place in a very concentrated time period that then had a huge effect over the course of life. And that's why I wanted to start with that, just how quickly or how easily I could have passed that bookshop and thought, no, we don't have the time, I want to get to the station early. Then I would have never picked up this book, never read the story, never enjoyed the story, never had the emotional connection to the story, and never be reviewing it now, of course. But this book itself is also about those moments that, are kind of incredibly large, but also seem small because they take place in such a concentrated time. So that's where I wanted to start. I'm going to launch straight in and just say this is a translated edition, of course, because it was written in Dutch. It's translated by Claire Nicholas White. So I just wanted you guys to know that in case you're looking for this particular edition or this translation. The translation was incredible, really, really nice. I almost could not even tell it was translated. Sometimes there's a few sticky words or a few sticky sentences that sort of don't translate perfectly, but you really couldn't tell in this. I thought it was really, really nice. I think I should do a bit of an overview. The book is mostly about this boy called Anton, except he's not a boy throughout the story. It's about his life. And as I said, this book is this book is taking place in Nazi-occupied Amsterdam in 1945, and it's about this family and the first few chapters, and there's going to be a spoiler here, but it's not a spoiler book because it affects the entire story. But this family is sitting around the table just sort of going about their daily business. They're under Nazi occupation, but it's sort of business as usual when suddenly they hear a gunfire or multiple gunshots, and there's a dead body it's not across the road, it's just a few houses up. This family comes out of the home, this other family, and drags the dead body in front of Anton's house. Anton's older brother is like, this isn't good. We can't have a dead Nazi in front of our house because then the Nazis will think that we're the ones that killed him. So he goes out to start trying to drag the body elsewhere. The Nazis then round the corner, having been alerted by the sound of gunshots going off, and basically all chaos breaks loose in that Anton's brother now has to run off and vanish into the night. Anton's parents are arrested, the house is set on fire, and Anton is separated from his parents and also kind of arrested but taken somewhere else. We then find out that Anton's parents are executed as a result of this. As I just said, the house is burnt down, and we find out later that his brother is also murdered as well. And so in the space of a few pages and only a few moments, Anton's life is completely different. And then from there, it's this story about Anton's life as he tries to sort of struggle with what's happened, but also try reject what's happened. And as he sort of progresses through his life and understands his position in the world, and also how this moment, this assault plays out, I guess on a larger stage throughout the course of his life. And that's what the story is about. So it's quite a dark topic. It's an incredibly philosophical novel. It's an incredibly beautiful novel. And I think it does a few different things that I think really make it stand out as a great novel. Something I really loved about this story is the opening chapters of the book, is the opening initial assault that happens, and the way that I guess Harry Mulisch as the writer kind of deals with it and presents it to us as the reader, because Anton is an incredibly young boy. I think he's 11 or 12 in the story. And this assault obviously happens, and it's so quick and frantic, and you're kind of reading this quite homely family sort of taking place. They're doing homework, they're chatting, various home life activities are going on, and within the space of, it's like a page, the entire story, the entire scene, the entire dynamics of everything that's going on and we've been reading has just completely shifted, and it's just turned so incredibly sharply and violently. And what happens from there is, of course, we follow Anton as he's whisked away to this police station and placed in a holding cell. And within just a few moments, and it must only be, an hour in the lives of Anton, his entire world has shifted. His parents, even though we don't know it at this stage, we find out not too long after, but his parents have been murdered as a result of it. His brother has been executed as a result of it, and his house is burnt down. And it's kind of like that really shocking thought of thinking, only an hour ago I was doing homework, and now my entire family has been murdered, and everything I ever owned and cherished is now ash in a burning house. And it's kind of like, how do you rationalize that as a child? How do you rationalize that as an adult at all, to be quite frank? But it's kind of the way that the story unfolds in these next, sort of few pages and chapters, and it kind of feels like this fever dream of flashes that Anton's sort of experiencing and moving through, and you can't quite comprehend it, and you get that sense through the story that it does feel incredibly sharp, and very much like flashes are just going off, and you're just getting snapshots as to little moments that are happening within the story, and you understand that he's having he as a character is struggling to process what is actually going on, and that is incredibly important that comes across really clearly on the page, because that really sets up to what the rest of the story is about. Because the assault for Anton becomes just kind of like this kind of fever dream that he may or may not have experienced in his childhood. It's just kind of this thing that he's kind of disassociated from his life. He kind of almost rejects the moment, but reject is probably the wrong word there. He dislocates it from himself and just kind of places it in the back of his mind. And he's, obviously very aware that he's lost his parents, his brother, and now he has to live with his auntie and uncle. And as he grows up, he realizes he's kind of okay with how he is, but it's kind of this inability to really process it on a way that's incredibly deep and meaningful. And this is what I really loved about the story, is that it's kind of this story where you're watching the consequences of actions, but you're watching the actions as a result of the consequences from the initial action. And it's kind of just this turning wheel of actions and consequences. And I think the best part of this story was watching Anton develop through the story itself, because he is this character that has disassociated this moment from his reality that he currently lives and exists in. And you get the sense that for Anton, he's okay with it because he thinks this moment only really involves him. He's the one that's had his parents killed. He's the one that's had his brother killed. He's the one that's had his house burnt down. But it's this wonderful story where actions have consequences and they don't progress in a linear kind of fashion. They progress in a kind of ripple-like fashion, rippling out and touching more than one person. And you see that this is playing out, this story, or the result of the consequence of this initial action is playing out across multiple people, multiple places, and multiple time periods. And that's something that Anton starts to recognize the older he gets, and the more that the trauma for him starts to develop within himself. But as he starts to grow up and understand his place in the world and understand that other people are around him were also affected from this initial action. So one of the best things about this story, I think, is the development of Anton as a character, as he starts to understand that this action, this assault, isn't actually just tied to him as a person. And like I said, it's not a linear trajectory of trauma going on or consequences going on, that it is actually tied to multiple different people. And through the course of the story, you understand that Anton as a character hasn't really associated a lot with politics. It's something he's kind of naturally shied away from and never really had too big a perspective on. But he starts to understand that everything has a different perspective, and everything, even this story that he thought was so intimately tied to him and so obviously only affected him, actually has affected so many other people in so many different ways. And even though it's a tragedy in his eyes that his parents have been killed and his brother has been killed and his house was burnt down, is viewed in different way by different people that were present at that particular time. And just sort of seeing that play out in a really kind of devastatingly quiet war novel was, I think, just a really beautiful and devastating kind of experience to have. And what it comes down to is it just becomes this story of understanding that the choices you make have consequences, and the morality and ethics of those choices, and the morality and ethics of those consequences then playing out as a result of the choices you have made. And like I said, I think it is just this quietly devastating war novel. And I think the last thing I'll say that I really loved about it was it definitely felt like a war novel, but not sort of the war novels that maybe dominate the sphere a bit more at the moment, in that it's not a story of, a wounded Nazi and then, you kind of nurse him back to health and understand that he's, a human being as well, and you fall in love or something like that, or you're, hiding someone in your attic and you fall in love with them. Like, there's no love story in the traditional sense. It actually felt like a really deeply personal, philosophical novel that broached so many, I think, poignant topics that really kind of add a very humane layer to the conversation of, the duality of war, the perspective of war, it doesn't really matter what side you're on. All that matters is you're the winning side, essentially, and quite kind of the devastating effects that even one death in a war as devastating as World War II can play out across multiple lives transcending the war itself, playing for 10, 20, 30, 40 years after the event can still be affecting people in a deeply personal and affecting way. So I absolutely loved it. It's like a near perfect novel for me. I really was blown away. I think, as I said, my grandma growing up in this time period and possibly imagining her as a character on the pavement across the road or something like that just adds that emotional intensity for me. But if you have nothing tied to the Netherlands or anything like that, I still think this book is incredible. Honestly, what would I rate this out of 5? Probably a 4.6 out of 5. So that was The Assault by Harry Mulisch. Okay, so what am I reading this week? This week I have started reading Midnight Blue by Simone van der Vlugt. It is the next book for the World Book Tour, and I'll be finishing the Netherlands with this book. I'm about halfway through. I'm kind of enjoying it. Well, I'm not kind of enjoying it. I am enjoying it. It's very, very different to The Assault. Very different writing style, pace of novel, very different story. It's about a widow that sort of is widowed and then tries to go live a life beyond her abusive husband in 17th century Holland. So it is a bit of a historic novel. I think it's got some wonderful facts in it, but I will talk about that more in 2 weeks' time. Okay, here we are at the end of the episode. Thank you so much, guys, for listening all the way to the end. I really do appreciate it. If you would like to like and subscribe, I'd greatly appreciate that too, of course. But as always, it's a free podcast, so I hope you enjoyed the show. I hope you're well, and I hope to see you next time. So today, to take us away, a quote from The Assault by Harry Mulisch, and it goes a little something like this. But that's why it's more difficult for us. For them, everything is simple, but for us, it's more complicated. We've got to become a little bit like them in order to fight them, so we become a little bit unlike ourselves.